In Denmark, we have a very strong tradition, both for fiction films, but also for documentaries. And while I attended the Danish Film School back in the late 1990s, there was both a fiction part of the school and a documentary part of the school. And this meant that I made both kinds of movies. I made both documentaries and fiction films. And I've continued to do that. And I find that there's more and more crossover between the two. The documentaries are more and more like working with a lot of elements from fiction films, and there's a lot of fiction films that work with elements from documentaries. And that goes for both like the stories and what is being told, but it certainly also goes for the filmmaking approach. For me as a sound designer, I feel that I'm very much in the middle of a very, very creative and very interesting part of kind of like film history, in a way, that there is so much going on now. I feel that there's a lot of creativity about sound, how to use sound in modern movies, and there are a lot of filmmakers who are very interested in working with sound. When you talk about sound and when you work with sound, it's communication is incredibly important. Mm-hmm. And I find that the more that we talk about sound, the earlier in the process we do that, the more the sound can be an integrated part of the movies we do. And I really, on the films I work on, I really try to make the sound something that you discuss already. If it's a fiction film, then talk about it already when writing the script. I usually get a script quite early on and bring a lot of feedback on that. And if it's a documentary, then already start when the director is planning to do the shoot, like start talking about the sound very early on, so that the important thing is to make the director listen as well, make the script writer listen, make the photographer listen, make the actors listen, so that when we work on a film, then it's not just me listening, it's everybody is listening. And I feel that the more we're listening, the more we open up the film for being a more sensual, a more atmospheric experience. When you, in a film, when you work with the sound and tell stories through sound, it hits you in a very emotional way. And it's really amazing, because it means that sound has this enormous effect on how we experience a film, how we experience a scene, how we experience a character. When I read a script, I usually think about, okay, so what is the character in this film, the character in this scene, what are they hearing? Which sounds are surrounding them? And I think as a script writer and a director, and also as a sound designer, I think that's a very important question to put in very early. So what are the people hearing? What is around them? I mean, if they just do, like, if it's a scene with two people in a restaurant and it's two lovers who wants to break up. So they're in this restaurant, and is this going to be a noisy restaurant with lots of noises from the kitchen, like and loud music and loud talk? Then they're going to talk really loud. I need to leave you. I can't be with you anymore. It's too much. I feel terrible about this. Or should it be a very, very quiet scene, a very quiet restaurant with just like very, very, maybe almost just very gentle music, no noises from the kitchen, and they will be whispering. I want to leave you now. I can't stand this anymore. I can't feel the connection. It's going to be a very, very different scene because of the sounds surrounding our characters. So I think it's something that's incredibly important to think of from the very beginning, because it also influences how the acting is. And by telling the actors to kind of think of how things sound, then it means that they also think about the environment in a different way, and it makes the acting often more realistic, actually, because it feels like they're part of a world and they're not just saying some dialogue. The sound of a film is often, we often kind of put it into different parts, different categories to kind of make it more easy to work with. And so there's 5 different elements. Mm-hmm. It's dialogue, which of course is very, very important. Dialogue is bringing a lot of information, and it's something that is important for you to hear. Mm-hmm. But dialogue can also be breaths, and in that sense, dialogue has a lot of different layers to it. But I often feel that it's that part of the sound is very much what you. When I work on a film, that is what comes from location. And also sometimes we do ADR, as it's called in the US. Like, the voice and the dialogue, of course, is a very important part. So that's the first element. The second element is what is called Foley. Foley is the sound of everything that the characters are doing. So it is the footsteps and sounds of the clothes and sounds of,
objects that they touch.
Scratching, or like putting earphones into your ears, or the glasses. Or mm-hmm. It's all these things that the characters do. The Foley comes from this special process where a Foley artist is in his or her studio and watching the screen, and then you have this studio where there's a lot of different surfaces, because depending on what kind of footsteps, is it in a forest, is it inside, is it asphalt, is it gravel? There's all these different surfaces that you then walk on, and then there's all these props from what you're doing. Is it a phone or a car door or whatever? Then the next element is ambiences, or atmospheres, as we call them here in Denmark. It's called backgrounds in the US. So those are all the sounds of the environment around the characters. So it's all these different sounds that surround them, but the natural environment. And then we have the next element is the effects, the sound effects. So that can be in the scene I'll show you now, there'll be a lot of animals where we use different sound effects to make them come alive. But it can also be explosions and gunshots and everything. Mm-hmm. And then there's the 5th element, which is the music. And of course, the music is incredibly important to a film. I really, really like when there's a close connection between the music and the sound, and you can kind of feel like sound and music melts together in a way.
I dag skal vi træne vildsang. Den skaber kontakt mellem os vildhekse og den vilde verden. Med vildsang kan man både berolige dyrene og tiltrække dem. Og jo bedre vi behersker vildsangen, jo bedre kan vi hjælpe naturen. Det vigtige er faktisk ikke sangen. Den hjælper bare til at fokusere energien. Prøv en gang til med lukkede øjne. Kan du høre, hvordan lyden omkring dig bliver højere? Prøv en gang og sæt dig ned og giv dig god tid. Mærk, lyt, koncentrer dig. Kan du høre naturen svare dig? Fantastisk. Han kom helt hen til dig.
Just to say something general about the film, yeah, it's this girl who finds out she's a witch and can talk with nature and can talk with animals. But it was incredibly important to make it an experience where we experience the world with her, so that we also as an audience experienced how is it to be in this world where suddenly nature comes alive and you hear things the way she does, where the sounds of nature are highlighted. And it's really about the senses, so it's a very sensual thing, and that made it very important to work with sound this way. So you see a lot of this scene is really about listening, like hearing and being sonically aware of what happens around you. And we are playing around a lot with like a normal perspective of a world, and then we go inside this girl's head and experience the world with her. At the same time, it's films like this, these kind of adventure films, fantasy films.
Yeah,
you always need to have a bad guy or a bad girl, as it is in this, like a scary kind of monster that is really. You see in the beginning, she's kind of hiding inside this house or inside this tree that you see in the beginning. So that was a chance to also make something there that is very dramatic and dynamic, so that it's when you're making sound for a film and making a film all over, it's really important to be very dynamic, to think about, okay, when should this be quiet and when should this be loud? I want to start out with going through these elements of what is in this sound that you hear. So we start out with just hearing the dialogue, and in the beginning with this evil witch that's in the tree, you hear her humming, but it's kind of like it's quite an evil humming, but it's a quiet sound that actually even makes her more scary. And then you cut to you hear this teacher that the girl has, who talks about the different things that she has to be aware of, that the girl has to be aware of. And it starts out as pretty much a voiceover, and then it turns into the sound of her on the set. And then quite quickly we go inside the girl's head, and then notice how the sound of the dialogue also becomes subjective, so that it changes from being very clear, but then we start working with echoes on the dialogue. So this is a way of making also the sound of the voice be abstract and be expressive. We hear the voice in the same way that the girl does.
Kom til mig. Kom. I dag skal vi træne vildsang. Den skaber kontakt mellem os vildhekse og den vilde verden. Med vildsang kan man både berolige dyrene og tiltrække dem. Og jo bedre vi behersker vildsangen, jo bedre kan vi hjælpe naturen. Det vigtige er faktisk ikke sangen. Den hjælper bare til at fokusere energi. Prøv en gang til med lukkede øjne. Kan du høre, hvordan lyden omkring dig bliver højere? Prøv en gang og sæt dig ned. Bare giv dig god tid. Mærk. Lyt. Koncentrer dig. Kan du høre naturen svare dig?
In the fragment that we just watched, are all the dialogues written, like none of them are ADR, they're all written during the production, right? Or
Well, the first voiceover of the woman, of the teacher, she that is ADR, but then the rest, and then there's ADR for the breathing of the girl and her sniffing. That's ADR. The rest of it is from the production.
Yeah, are the sounds of the insects are those like SFX or Foley?
Those are all effects or atmospheres. Like it's a mixture of things, but it's definitely something I added on afterwards, and it's not Foley. The Foley is very much creating the body of the acting, so that you feel like it's not just a voice, but it's actually a full body of an actor. So you get the whole physicality of that. And then I also love the Foley that's been done for the bear. Notice at the end how you really hear the big footsteps and its movements. So that's also done in Foley. I wanted to make this film feel really like you heard nature in a new way, because that's how our main actor or main character is listening to the world. She's hearing nature in a new way. So what I did with the ambiences and the sounds of the nature was that I got this idea that I wanted to mix nature sounds from all around the world, kind of put them together to create a new kind of nature that felt like listening to nature in a new way. So when you hear now the different birds and insects, those birds are, I got hold of nature recordings. I've been traveling a lot myself, and I always bring like a hard disk recorder and record different sounds, but I also got hold of different field recordings and nature recordists from around the world who had recorded nature in Africa and Australia and South America and like all around Europe. And there was a lot of different nature sounds that I put into this to make it feel like kind of like a nature that was totally limitless in a way, so that you really get this feeling of listening to nature in a new way and making nature sound in a way like you haven't heard it before. There's a lot of different nature sounds in that, so it's birds from all around, and I found all these different bird calls that could change throughout the sequence, and depending on her mood, and should it be a sad bird, should it be a scared bird, should it be a dangerous bird, should it be a beautiful bird. There are so many different layers to it, so it's very interesting. The next one I want to show is the effects stereo. So that's more like really the sound effects. So these are the sounds of the witch in the beginning, which are a lot of like creaking sounds. Like I wanted her body to sound like she's almost like a bird in herself, like like crackling bones. And then it starts out with this thunder that actually goes a lot with that I've pitched, and I've worked on the thunder so it fits with the music in the beginning. Then we go into the witch scene where she has all these sounds. Then we go to the scene in the forest, and there's all these abstract sounds that are made to kind of get inside the head of the main character. So there's all these tonal elements that I really love to work with sound in a very musical way. So you hear all these tonal elements. And then, of course, then there's the bear coming in, who should sound really scary and heavy, and the big scream, and like all the sounds of I mean, I got hold of a lot of recordings of bears for that moment. So at the end there, it's actually a seal, because we had a hard time finding a bear that kind of make like. So that's a seal.
Okay.
But the other sounds are from a bear.
Okay.
And then we have the music, and the music is I mean, in a film like this, there's often a lot of music. So we talked a lot about, okay, how can we make the music feel not just as something that is just all around the film. I mean, I feel that in a lot of big action blockbuster fantasy films in the US from Hollywood, there's often music pretty much all the time. And we really want the music to be more dynamic in this film, and also more poetic in a way. So we did a lot of exchanging of sounds and music throughout the process. So the composer and I sent files back and forth all the time to make the music and the sound really fit together. It's interesting that, I mean, when you see the effects with the bear, for example, it feels very dramatic without music. It's like, oh my God, now she's gonna die. But when you hear it with the music, then the music is more like an adventure. There's a beauty to it. There's a poetry to it. So it's also important to think about, okay, what story is the music telling and what is story is the sound telling. And I think it's very important when you work on a film to think about, okay, make sure that the sound and the music is not telling the same story. Because if it's telling the same story, then it'll step on each other's feet, and it'll quite quickly become quite messy, and it will be hard to kind of distinguish, okay, what story is going on here. It'll feel like too much. So I really feel that generally, like really thinking about how to approach the music storytelling wise is super important to do that at the same time with the sound. So the more collaboration that can be between the sound designer and the composer, the better. The beginning, you establish an environment. In the beginning, you establish a song, like you hear all the instruments starting. So then you hear all the birds and the insects, and you're in the forest. Then you hear someone talking, and the other elements go more quiet. Then you have the first line of dialogue stopping. Then you have, I mean, if it was a song, then you would have the drums doing a fill, or like a guitar doing a small solo. And then I put in an insect or a bird. It constantly kind of goes in and out and changes all the time. And the music does the same thing. So that's very important to think about when you do sound for movies, that things have to be very dynamic and things have to change all the time, because the ear can also get, I mean, almost like fatigue, so that if it gets bored very easily. But if you constantly hear new sounds, then you can make, oh wow, what is that? And that happens very unconsciously. So sound is also a way of constantly making the scenes, make them come alive and make them dynamic and make them interesting for the audience. It's very different from film to film, because it depends, of course, on the amount of details you need to do and how much you need to build up a whole entire world. When you do a film like this, that is, I mean, where you create everything, then it takes quite a lot of time. And I mean, I guess a sequence like this is probably all included, like with all the sounds you hear, that can easily be like almost a week of work or something. But I feel that often, like I get involved very early, and then I start doing I pick out some sequences which are very important. Like this scene is something that we kept on working on for a long time, because it's a key scene for the main character. So I didn't work on it for a week, just on, like, I started very early and did a first sketch, and then you kind of find out, okay, so this works well, this doesn't work well, so let's try out something else. And then you find out, okay, how should this film sound? And then you kind of spread that to the rest of the film. When I'm working on a film like this, these kind of fantasy films, I'm usually working on them for 4 months or something, all in all, 3-4 months. And then I have a team of 4 people, 5 people. There's always like a dialogue editor who edits the dialogue and makes sure that we have, so that it cleans up the dialogue. Then I have a Foley artist who does the Foley. I have a Foley editor who edits all the Foley. Then I have an assistant who helps me out with whatever I need to, everyday things. There's a lot of things. And then sometimes I also, on a film like this, I also have an extra effects editor who helps me out with cutting effects. And then in the end, I have a mixer. Sometimes I mix myself. Often we are 2 people mixing. So it's nice with some extra ears in the mix process because it's the final part of the sound work. For documentary, I usually ask for a week of work for week of sound editing per 15 minutes. I'd say that on a feature film, it's kind of on a basic feature films, it's double that. So it's usually 12 to 14 weeks, and then you have 2 weeks of mixing. I usually try to use as much as possible from the production with dialogue. I feel that dialogue, the way that the actors work with dialogue is just like, it can be really emotional and very special what is caught on the set. And I think it's so important to spend time on really making sure that you get good sound from the set, from the recording. All the other sounds you hear are made afterwards in Foley or sound effects or in ambiences and atmospheres. So, there's a lot of noise on film set. So I feel that it's generally, I don't use much of that. In a documentary, of course, I use more production sound, but I also add a lot of sounds of atmospheres and effects on documentaries. But then I spend a lot of time on getting hold of proper sound recordings from the different locations. The thing about being part of a project very early is that I also know which sounds we need for the film. So I can start on very early to collect sounds, to go out and record sounds or get hold of the sounds that I need for the film, so that when I start on my sound editing, then I already have a big library of sounds with, new, fresh sounds that fits with the film. It's a big help. For something like The Witch, I always have all these associations. So for me, I was inspired by this kind of monster or good monster in Pan's Labyrinth by Guillermo del Toro. I really loved the sound of that film, and I really loved this fauna, which was this kind of wooden monster, but that had all these creaking sounds, and I liked that it made, when I started using that for this evil witch, then it felt like she was a part of nature as well, and I liked that. So it was nature being evil. Some of the more abstract sounds, like the tonal sounds that we heard, a lot of that comes from just playing around with elements. I really love playing around with different reverbs and pitching things down, and there's I also played a lot around with different delays for this film. There's an amazing, now just a little technical, but something called Slapper, which is like a plugin for delays that has all these abstract delays, so that it's like, so I used that for both some of the dialogue where you hear these echoes, but also for taking some of the nature sounds and then putting it through these different effects. It created these abstract ambiences. So I like to work with sound in that abstract way. The thing about Kristofer Nolan's sound designer, Richard King, he has this approach that he records as many new sounds as possible, and they have to be right. So he really spends a lot of time on gathering sound for the films he do. And I mean, in that way, he has inspired me to kind of think about sound in this way, where you really spend a lot of time on just gathering sound effects. And when he was working on Dunkirk, he got hold of recordings of all these different planes and bombs and machines and boats that were in the film. But there was one of the boats that he couldn't get hold of, which was this boat that the two boys and their father is sailing on. It was kind of like a very old boat that they stopped making those in the US. He couldn't get hold of it, and then he found out that it still existed in Scandinavia. And then he wrote me and said, okay, I really need this sound of this boat, and can you get hold of that sound? And then I found that kind of boat in Denmark, and I went out with my assistant, and we spent the day recording the sounds of that boat. And Richard had made a long list of what he needed. Like, it needed to sail fast, it needed to stop, it needed to go backwards, we needed the engine from different perspectives, and all these different things. So we recorded lots of sounds on that boat, and then spent time afterwards editing it, and then sending those to Richard, who then used it in the film. Then half a year later, when Dunkirk was out, I was in LA for like a sound and music award show. And then I met Hans Zimmer's assistant, who I talked with, and then he said, thank you so much for those boat sounds. We used those in the music as well. What? So Hans Zimmer used the boat sounds in the music, and I really loved that idea, and it says a lot about how they approached the sound in that film, that sound and music really came together. And in that sense, also, like I said before, like how to approach sound and music so it's almost one thing. And they, for the film, they had this concept that throughout the whole film, they worked with this concept called the shepherd's tone, which is like this tone that just keeps on kind of getting higher and higher. And it's kind of like it's a trick, it's a mind trick. So you can actually make a tone that lasts for 1.5 hours that just feels like it just keeps on rising. Yeah. And they did that with the sounds and the music in Dunkirk. So that whole film is one long shepherd's tone that just keeps on building. Last year there came out a movie about sound design called Making Waves. Making Waves. Yeah, it's really great. I mean, it's telling the story of sound for film, both like historically and then also going through the different elements, like I just did, like going through the elements of what you can do with sound in a film. And it's really well done. I can really recommend that film. It's a great place to also just hear about a lot of movies which have amazing sound and which are very inspiring, and which is great to, I mean, I really love watching and listening to movies, and it's amazing how much inspiration you can get just from watching great movies with great sound. I mean, it shouldn't be mastered because it shouldn't be super loud. It's important that it's dynamic. And then it's important to give the music in stems, which is like separated elements, so that you have like the guitar and the flute and the violins and the drums, and I mean split out so that that's very helpful for like when you're mixing in the cinema, like making it sound good in the cinema. But it's also actually a great idea to do that very early on. I've on the last many projects I've been doing, the composer has also, when doing the first cues for the film, has done things in stems, and that's really helpful also in the picture editing, because maybe you only want the piano to play instead of all the other elements, and then suddenly when you deliver a piece of music in one track in 5 stems, then suddenly it's actually 5 pieces of music. So it's a way of like, oh, okay, maybe only that ambient element should play. So it's a great way of making it more flexible for the process. And I think that's very important to think about that. The more open and helpful and flexible something is, the better it is for the process. It's really important to listen and to play around with sound. So these small recorders now, they are so cheap. You can record some really great sounds on a cheap hard disk recorder, and then get a lot of, just record a lot of sound. And
like
then,
Zoom, for example,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Zoom and all these different small recorders. The quality is quite amazing. I use a lot of sounds recorded like that in my films, because I walk around with a recorder like that all the time. And when I'm in the supermarket, I hear a freezer that is noisy, and then I record that. And so, my kids are very used to kind of me suddenly stopping and recording something, and then they run away and look like they don't know me at all. And then also just play around and play around with smaller projects, and just start out doing short films and finding some people that you like to work with. That's how, I started out, a lot of the people I work with now, we started out doing short films together, and now we do big feature films. It's a really nice development. And then all your favorite films, watch them 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and really listen to, okay, how did they do this? How did they make these sounds? That can teach you a lot about how to do sound for movies as well. Thank you for listening. Thanks.
Yep.
Представляют, например, на какой-то вечеринке человеку и
там 15 лет работы с Пафнутием, с Мишей, общий язык, который является